Okay, welcome to our pop-up assembly and grid strainer course. This will be basically over lavatory, grid strainers and assemblies, so let's dive into it. So we have typically a few different types here. I got a few different examples here. So this is your traditional pop-up assembly over here. You can see it's a brass tailpiece. It's got your mechanical levers and your parts here. This will always be paired with a certain type of faucet. The faucet must have a hole in the back of it, right? So that'll allow for this arm to go up and down and move this device in and out so we can stop it up, right? This is a traditional mechanical style pop-up assembly. These are great if they're installed correctly. You'll also see these come in plastic sometimes. That's just cutting corners in a cheaper product. It's real common to see these with newer faucets, like from the home centers and things like that. So just to let you know that this is going to be a quality one, plastic not so much. Diving into the next one here is we have this is a push button style. This has a little mechanical device inside of it with the spring. These are really great. This is a great product. This one here you can see actually has a plastic tailpiece, but this is more of like a Schedule 80, or it's thick. It's real thick. It's a thread. I think it's Schedule 80, but that's a good quality product there. Obviously, you don't want to cross thread your plastic threads. Putting that back in. Let's see if I can do that. There we go. But this is a great pop-up because it's just mechanical. It's very quick and easy. You don't have to worry about the lever mechanism and things failing there. You can see that this one has an overflow on it, okay, as well as this one, and we'll talk about that in a minute. That's an overflow hole. And then right next to that one is a grid strainer. So these are called grid strainers. This one here has an overflow on it as well. This is pretty traditional to see in a commercial application, and we'll show you more about that in a second. And then the last one here is a grid strainer. This is more of a vessel strainer, and it does not have an overflow on it, but as you can see, it does not have a way to block the drain either, and we'll talk more about that. So this is a vessel strainer, vessel grid strainer. This is a grid strainer with an overflow, and again, push button, pop up with overflow, and then we obviously have the brass one over here. That's the traditional style with the mechanical lever. So these are going to be real common in what you see when we do any type of lavatory strainer tailpiece kind of connection. And let's dive into it a little bit more. Okay, the grid strainer is going to be real common with the overflow. You'll see these in commercial applications. As you can see, this wall hung lavatory here is a pretty common thing you'd see in, like I said, a commercial application. Sometimes you'll see these in houses, and if it's in a house, we'd probably more than likely go with a traditional pop-up assembly with lever. But if it's in a commercial setting, you won't typically see this. You'll see this, okay? And in the commercial setting, this has that overflow, and you see these holes here. Sometimes there's a hole here, and there's a hole here. That means if this drain was ever blocked, water could flow down here. As it's overflowing, it'll go into this hole, come down like a tube or a raceway, an opening, and it'll actually drain into this. So that's what that is. That's basically for an overflow. If we had this in a commercial setting, just to mention, and this was closed, right? Kids could block the sink, and it might not have it might overflow, right? So this is just extra precaution here to keep them from not blocking it, right? There's no way to block this, but this is where you typically see a grid strainer. Okay, next up, we're going to talk about what's called a vessel strainer. So this is recommended for customers who have a vessel bowl. What is a vessel bowl? A vessel bowl sets on top of the counter, and as you can see, it does not have an overflow tube on it, right? So there's no way for it to have that extra step of precaution, right, to prevent it from flooding. So if this gets blocked, right, it's going to overflow. So having a push button mechanism here would not be smart, right? People still do it, but there's a lot of risk involved. Somebody could push that in, a kid, or turn it on, and it's just going to go everywhere. So having a grid strainer style like that in a vessel sink like this is ideal. As you can see, the threads go all the way up on this one because the bowl is so thin. If you look at the thickness of the bowl here, right, or the vessel, you can see it's real thin. So this would seal up really tight there, and it would not allow anyone to block it, right? And so it can overflow. You'll typically see these with faucets like this or coming out of the wall, right? And this is the ideal strainer to use on a vessel sink. Okay, next up we're going to talk about the traditional style pop-up assembly. This is what you're going to see in most residential homes. Mechanical device with the lever, right, that moves up and down with the rod here. You can see that in this application here. So where do we use this? On what types of sinks? Well, you always want to make sure that your faucet has a spot for the rod, right? If we don't have that, we can't use this type of device. So you'll see this in most residential homes, like I said here. This would be a great application. You can see it has the overflow hole. If you feel here, oh, actually, on this one right here, it does not have an overflow hole, right? So this would be basically pointless in this situation. But you can see that it does have a good, thick spot where the pop-up assembly is going to go on. So this is going to seal up just fine. If the rubber went up that high on this type of application, right, it would be no good, right? So as long as that's thick, an example of that would be, just to show you, you'd never install one of these on a vessel, right? But you can see how thin the vessel is. This would leak right out of the bottom, right? So that's something to think about. So back to the pop-up assembly here. Again, this one doesn't have an overflow, but you would see this in a traditional home, just like such, with the mechanical lever on this 4-inch spread faucet. This would be a great place to install this. This is a self-rimming sink. You can see there's two different styles here. This is a 4-inch spread, 8-inch spread, would not matter, right? As long as the residential faucet had the hole in the back, so you could put your mechanical lever in, this would be a totally fine application. You can see we have an overflow hole down here. So that would be a great place to install that. Same thing goes for this little guy here. Again, you can see that this is really thick down here. See down here, like this? So this would be fine to install here. It just would not work correctly because there's no overflow. But you could put that with the 4-inch spread faucet, up and down, your lever would work fine. Same thing with pedestals. This is an 8-inch spread, 4-inch spread. You can see we have overflow holes here. It's good and thick base down here. This would work great there. Same thing. And then obviously it would work fine on this wall hung sink. But if this is in a commercial application, we would not put one of these, right? We'd put a regular grid strainer to prevent flooding and things like that. And as you can see here on this one here, this 8-inch spread faucet here on this vanity, this would work great as well. There's an overflow hole. Of course, this is a different finish. So that's a great spot. All those spots there are fine to use as traditional pop-up assembly. And remember, sometimes you'll see these in plastic, and that comes with the cheaper faucet. And so that's a great selling point on what you install versus what the customer provides. So last, we're gonna go ahead and go over the push button style assembly here. So this is a step up from this traditional pop-up assembly because there's way less moving parts, and this can be applied to all the same applications I just talked about with the traditional pop-up assembly. It has the overflow. It's very easy for the customer to use, and they can actually just unscrew it, which is nice to get in there and remove hair, anything like that. So they really don't even need a plumber to service these. So these are just a great choice and something to offer the customer because again, the traditional ones are a lot harder to work on and unblock. So this here would work great in any one of those applications I just talked about. Traditional casework here, again, the overflow would not work because there's no hole. This would work fine on these self-rimming sinks. This one, we would not want to install on the vessel sink. It's not ideal because it can be blocked and then it'll overflow. As you can see, there's no overflow. As you can see, it's really thick. It would need a thick base. And just by tightening that up, this is more than likely gonna leak down here. So this would not work here. That's why it's good to go with the no overflow grid strainer on these. This would work great on this application. Works great on pedestals, right? Either style, right? Doesn't matter. And you don't have to worry about the faucet here with the lever, which is nice. This will work great on this in a residential application. Again, if this is commercial, someone could block it, and then we'd have to rely on the overflow to keep up without it overflowing, and sometimes that doesn't always work. And then lastly, it'd work great on this undermount bowl here. You could leave this in. If we was to put one of these in to match this finish for decorative purposes, you just leave that rod in, remove all this, stick this in there. This would be a matching finish to this. No one would ever mess with that. Just to let you know, you could also put a clip on the bottom of that to keep people from pulling it out. So that really concludes all of our pop-up assembly and grid strainer types and applications.